How long should your audit be? Well, I can give you some common schedules that we see for different companies and what seems to work well. I can tell you what really doesn't work well. And of course, the most obvious thing is if you're hiring a consultant to do your audit, everybody wants it to be as short as possible so they don't spend money. But think about why you're doing the audit. If you just want a piece of paper that says we did an audit, sure, have it be as short as you want. Try to get it all squeezed in one day. And if you can find an auditor that'll do a full quality system audit in one day, you go right ahead and hire them. But one day is not enough to do a full quality system audit. It's just not. There's too much to cover in a full quality system in order to sample records and sample procedures to make sure you've covered everything in an 8, 9, or 10-hour day. It's still not going to happen in one day. You need longer for a full quality system audit. But how long should they be? And what do you do differently for supplier audits? Do supplier audits get the same duration as an internal audit? Normally not. I'll cover supplier audits first. When I think of a supplier audit, I think of them as being just a department in your company. So if you're outsourcing packaging and sterilization, and that's what that company does, think of it as a packaging and sterilization department in your company. So how long would you take to audit a single department in your company? If you had your own clean room and your own packaging line and an ultrasonic cleaning line, and you shipped things off to the sterilizer and then you reviewed the sterilization records when it came back, how much time would you spend auditing that as a process in your company? You wouldn't spend days auditing that. You wouldn't spend 3 days just on that. You might not even spend a whole day on that. But if you're doing a supplier audit, you need to drive there and drive back a lot of times, unless you're doing a remote audit. So you want to get as much value as you can out of it. So doing a one-day audit of a supplier is pretty typical. Because practically speaking, I probably can't get in 2 audits unless I happen to have 2 suppliers that are just a few miles apart. And I can happen to get in the night before, or I have a really early morning flight that I can take. So if I'm going to do an on-site audit of that supplier, I'm probably going to spend as much of the day as I can there. I might cut out early to catch an early flight home because I don't need the whole day to finish auditing those processes. The packaging process, the ultrasonic cleaning line, maybe the receiving inspection, and the final release of the product after it's done with a sterilizer. I might even look at some validation protocols and some training records, but I'm not going to look at their management review process. I'm not going to look at CAPAs unless they have CAPAs that are specific to my process. I'm just not going to look at everything. I'm going to look at the things that are important to what they do for me. So that's how I would organize my time for a supplier. If you wanted to cut down on the number of hours that you spend auditing a supplier, you could do it remotely. If you've visited the supplier before and you know the facility and you're fairly confident that they're going to make good quality product for you, but you feel you need to do another spot check of that company, you could ask for records from them remotely and do a remote audit. And you could alternate between on-site audits and remote audits. And if they're in another country, that might be a really cost-effective way to do it, because flying to another country, whether it's in Germany or it's in Korea or it's in Mexico, those audits are going to cost you a lot of money to do that travel and the amount of time that it takes out. So doing a remote audit and alternating back and forth might not be a bad idea. You might also consider hiring an auditor in that location so they don't have the travel costs. That brings us to how long would I spend on auditing an internal audit? If you're auditing an internal process, most of the time when I'm doing a full quality system audit, I need maybe an hour for a process, unless it's a very long, involved process where there are a lot of records to sample. In the case of design controls, typically I'm going to want closer to 3 or 4 hours. If the company is very large and they have a lot of records to sample, I might need longer for a process, but 4 hours is pretty much the max I'm going to spend on a process. And as we've said in some of our previous articles, what is the optimum duration of a Zoom call? If you're going to do a remote audit via Zoom or Skype or some other teleconferencing method, after about 90 minutes, everybody wants to get off that phone. It's like sitting in a classroom. After about 90 minutes, everybody's attention shot. So you might want to consider breaking your audits down to 90 minutes or less if you're doing them remotely. And that should be enough for most processes. And remember, you don't have to do everything on Zoom. You can ask for the documents ahead of time, review procedures, things like that, maybe sample some of the things, interview people over the phone, and then have them send you some of the records for follow-up after the Zoom session. So audit preparation, reading procedures beforehand, interview during the 90 minutes, and then reviewing records that they've sent you as a follow-up after the Zoom session might give you as long as 2 or 2.5 hours for that process, even though you only spent about 90 minutes on the Zoom call with them. That would be a very thorough process audit. So if you have an independent process that you've made some changes to recently, maybe in response to a CAPA or an FDA 483 finding, you might plan on spending as much as 2 or 2.5 hours on that process, but you should plan on 90 minutes or less on the Zoom call with people. And that's when you're going to do that kind of a thorough audit. If, however, the process hasn't changed much and you're just doing an internal audit to say, I've audited this process, you don't need that long. You might even be able to cover 2 processes in that 90-minute audit. For instance, you're covering document control and record control and nothing's changed in those procedures. You just have more records and you're going to do some sampling. You're going to review the procedures. Yep, no changes since last time. I don't see anything that needs to be fixed in these procedures. Now let's sample some records. Let's interview some people. I might be able to finish both of those processes in 90 minutes without any trouble. So if it's a lower priority process without changes, you can probably do more than one in that 90-minute session. And if it's a very thorough audit that you need to do in response to a CAPA as an effectiveness check, you might want to spend 90 minutes just for one process. So that gives you an idea. Now, if you have, the FDA says there are 25 procedures that are required. So you have to have, the company shall establish documented procedures for, let's say, document control. There are 25 of those things that fall into the FDA's regulations, and some of them might not be applicable to you. You might not have any devices that require installation. You might not have service at your company. So if those things don't apply, you might have closer to 23 or something processes to look at. And if you're going to spend an hour on each process, let's say it's 23 hours of work, you can probably finish your entire quality system in just about 3 days. So that happens to be why a lot of these audits are about 3 days long. Could you do it in less? Probably you can do it in less, but you're going to have to spend less time on some of those less important areas. And it's pretty easy in an audit report to say, there haven't been any changes to the procedure. So I sampled the following records. There were this many ECOs or DCNs that were available in the log for me to sample. I sampled this many of them and I didn't find any errors and there were no nonconformities found. Next process, please. So you might be able to do that in 20 minutes if you're really rushed. So you can squeeze an audit down to 2 days. But if your purpose is to prepare for an upcoming FDA inspection or a recertification by a notified body, or you're updating the scope of your certification and now include MDSAP or CE marking and it wasn't before, these are all times when you're not going to want to cut it close and do less. If you want to save money in those situations, maybe a better strategy is instead of hiring somebody to do a full quality system audit, maybe you have the more expensive consultant professional auditor just look at the processes that are really important to you. Processes that have changed recently, processes that have new employees, processes where you have new products going through it. Anything that's new, changed, different, those are the areas that you want to focus your best auditors on and spend the most amount of time on. And if you can try to finish all the other processes done by internal people that didn't have a conflict, then you might save those processes for an external auditor to finish all in one on-site audit or even a remote audit. But don't think automatically, I'm just going to do one full quality system audit a year and I'm going to have as few hours as I possibly can. If that's your goal, you're not really treating a quality system the way it should be. You're just trying to get a piece of paper so you don't end up with a nonconformity in your next audit. And if that's what your goal is, you probably wouldn't be watching my video anyway. So I hope that was helpful to you to sort of explain how long your audit should be. Supplier audits, typically a day. If you're doing it remotely, you could do it in less. If you're doing an internal audit, you're doing a full quality system, a day isn't enough. 2 days is really cutting it close. probably 3 days is what you need if you're a smaller company that can be audited in that kind of time frame. And if you're a bigger company, you might even need more than one auditor. I hope that helps you. And if you have any further questions, don't hesitate to contact us at Medical Device Academy, and we'd be happy to answer more of your questions about internal auditing or supplier audit. Have a great day. Bye-bye.